What an exciting way to get started this morning. It really is my true pleasure to be with you all this morning. Our foundation, Pritzker Foster Care Initiative, is a very proud supporter of Foster Together Network, part of LA County Center for Strategic Partnerships. In May, you may remember that I was part of the team that helped bring to you the spring series focused on mentoring that Foster Together Network hosted. And it's really my honor now for the fall series focused on exploring solutions to kick off our program on ways that we might all think about doing better in terms of recruiting and supporting caregivers. Our foundation over the years has really looked at this issue, understanding that there really has never been enough placement options for our kids in care. Some of the projects that we've supported over the years focused on this issue have been Foster More, which really does utilize a very innovative approach to foster parent recruitment, utilizing social media and digital marketing strategies to recruit high quality caregivers for really a fraction of the cost of traditional recruitment models. Also Raise a Child, who helped organize today's conference. They've done a lot of incredible work in partnership with UCLA to both research and improve and influence prospective caregivers' feelings towards adopting harder to place youth. Those young people who might be part of the sibling set, who are older, who identify as LGBTQ+, etc. We've also supported wonderful organizations like Fostering Unity, who's with us today, and Second Nurture, who cultivate community as a key principle of their recruitment and caregiver support strategy. And of course, Foster Together Network, which when it was launched all these years ago, was really to bring together LA County, DCFS, and the community-based organizations and FFAs to focus on the crisis of not enough foster parents and caregivers and placement options. So with that background, I'm so excited to hear about the solutions that our panelists will share with us today. And it is really my pleasure to introduce our moderator for this morning's conversation, Maggie Lynn. Maggie is not only a colleague, but a dear friend. She's the executive director of Foster Nation, an organization that she co-founded in 2016 with Jeannie Pritzker. The idea behind Foster Nation was, how do we bring millennials in the community together with their peers who grew up in foster care and think about ways to support them as they grow into self-sufficient, thriving adults? Maggie brings incredible heart to this work, and it's my pleasure now to pass the mic to her to get us started. Thank you, Maggie.
Thanks so much for the warm intro, Lauren. I've had the honor of working with Lauren for nearly 7 years now, and it's people like her and many of the panelists, as well as all of you, that truly make this such a rewarding experience. Hello, everyone. Good morning. I'm beyond excited to be here today and to be the moderator. To give you all some context for why I'm moderating our session entitled The New Recruit, Supporting Resource Parents for Today's Needs, I'd like to quickly share my background. I grew up in the LA County foster care system for nearly a decade with my younger sister because of family abuse after we moved here from Taiwan. And I moved through 6 placements in 10 years. And I've had the entire spectrum of traumatic foster care experiences, being placed in foster homes that didn't speak my language because English was my second language, homes that put locks on the fridge, being separated from my sister. But I've also had the fortune of being placed in a loving home before I emancipated, and it was in that home that changed the trajectory of my life. Before we start, I want to take a moment to thank all of you for everything you do. As a child growing up in foster care, I always thought I was going through this life alone without the love and support of anyone. And the most incredible thing about what I do now at Foster Nation and working in this space now with all of you is realizing how many people truly care behind the scenes, even if I didn't know that then. And that is the underlying tone I'd like to set for today, that each and every one of you are doing what you can to make a difference in the foster care experience. And as a former foster child and youth, I'm truly grateful for that. As someone who has been on the receiving end of everyone's work here, I'm beyond excited to explore solutions together that we can, so that we can take action throughout, moving forward. So now on to why we're here. I'm going to do a quick summary of session 1. So as Jamal mentioned earlier, if you missed that one, make sure you get notes or get the recording. But in session 1 of the Foster Together Network, the Solution Series, we learned how the Family First Prevention Services Act of 2018 is changing the landscape of foster care across the US. Here in California, and before the Family First Prevention Services Act, California State Assembly Bill 403, called the Continuum of Care Reform Act, of 2015 already set statewide changes in motion. Since then, California's County Department of Children and Family Services, DCFS, they're seeing great success in finding relative caregivers for children and youth coming into the foster care system. As group homes are closing around the state and around the nation, there are many children and youth in foster care who need individual nurturing foster and foster to adopt homes. And today's session is all about the new recruit, supporting resource parents for today's needs. So what do we mean by today's needs? Let's start here. The LA County DCFS has reported monthly successes of placing incoming foster children with relative caregivers at rates between 70 to 90%, which is something we should celebrate. On the other side of today's foster equation are non-relative caregivers who are being asked to care for children and youth from intensive services foster care, transitional age youth, youth of color, youth with large sibling groups, and LGBTQ plus youth. This morning's series will look at our ask for foster and foster to adopt parents, also known as resource parents. We're seeing changes in the populations of children and youth in need of placement in the individual homes. So it seems to make sense that we should also ask if our methods of caregiver recruitment and training techniques are changing along with this shift to find the best fit homes. So join us in this discussion as we consider foster parent recruitment, retention, and support techniques that may better match the needs of today's resource parents. And one last thing before we start, I'd like to invite everybody in the audience to type their questions in the Q&A button throughout the session as your questions arise. It's right next to the raise your hand button. And following our presentation, we will read your questions and ask our panelists to address them. With that, sorry, that was a mouthful. I'm excited to introduce today's panel of experts from across the spectrum of foster care. Please welcome Jennifer Rexroad, founder and executive director of the California Alliance of Caregivers, Dr. Kate Messina, founder and CEO of Wisdom Pathway Institute, Elena Macaluso, representing the California Employment Development Department, and Dana Fryer, director of operations at Fostering Unity. Thank you all so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having us.
So let me start with you, Jen. So Jen is with the California Alliance of Caregivers. Jen, from your perspective, was I correct in how I presented the challenge of recruiting and training foster and foster to adopt parents? And what are you seeing and hearing from caregivers in your organization?
Yes, thank you, Maggie. So as you said, now that congregate care facilities or group homes are closing, the system is now placing youth with higher needs into family homes, which is the goal. And so we are now needing caregivers who are needing to meet a much higher level of care. And supporting caregivers as they support and care for our youth has been a challenge. To get all the support and services that families need to create a stable home for youth who've experienced trauma so that they can heal and thrive has been challenging. And I'll highlight three of the challenges that I think that we hear about most of all, and some ideas for solutions that are out there, and some are happening right now. The first one being time. As we know, we all live busy lives. Parents, especially in California, need to work. And so the cost of living in our state and paying for housing is very high. There are a lot of single parents, and youth with higher levels of needs need a lot of care in terms of transportation to therapy, to school, to after school activities, to court, to visitation. And so having the time to meet all of the youth's needs can be very challenging for families. And many families need help with supervision and also with transportation. And so there are some programs that help families with transportation to visitation and to school of origin. it's a goal to keep youth in their school of origin. But that school may be a long distance from the caregiver's home. And so many families feel pressed to meet all of the needs that their youth have without the support, especially in those two areas. And the second one I'll say is support in terms of therapeutic services. We know that there is a workforce shortage, and some families have to wait on a long wait list in order to connect with a provider. Some youth can't receive the level of care, the level of behavioral health services they need in the right quantity in the right time. And that's very challenging when you have a family that would like to stabilize a youth in their home if they can't access services. Many of our youth need education services. They may need help with tutoring or special education services to help them with education. And oftentimes that can be challenging as well to advocate and to get all of the right support in place. Another one that I'd like to highlight is respite. And so we hear that families are in desperate need for respite, especially when they may have a family emergency or need to focus on the needs of other family members. Respite is really important for resource parents to have access to. And then the third challenge I'll say is navigation. Navigating multiple systems. So they might have to navigate the regional center system and child welfare, education, and behavioral health. And for someone who's stepping into this for the first time in a moment of crisis, when a youth comes into their home, is extremely challenging.
Jen, thank you for sharing that. It's I feel like a lot of the points that you mentioned are actually pain points that I felt, as a child when I was in the system. And I love that you framed kind of the three biggest challenges. And given that this is a solution series, I wonder if you can share just, really quickly, what can we do now to better support this, the new recruitment process of caregivers and resource parents?
I think some of the programs that counties and other agencies have with peer mentors, parent peer mentors for resource parents, resource parent liaisons, parent coaching that we're going to hear a little bit more about, other people with experience that can hold a resource parent's hand through the really difficult times is very beneficial, because they probably don't have friends or relatives that know what they're going through and know how to support them. So we find that is very, very helpful for parents to have access to someone to help them in that way. There are some respite programs and some agencies and counties that offer respite, and this is very helpful for families to be able to take a break, recharge, and also meet the needs of themselves and their other family members. I'll also say childcare has come a long way in the last few years. We're very grateful for the Emergency Child Care Bridge program. But childcare is necessary for working families to take foster youth.
Great, thank you for that, Jen. I think this is the perfect segue into our conversation with Dr. Messina. Dr. Messina, for decades, the mental health approach to supporting resource parents, has been to primarily focus on the mental health of children and youth in foster care rather than focusing on the resource parents. But in your work in partnership with Foster All in Southern California, you're flipping the script there. Can you share your philosophy and tell us a little bit of, how you got to that approach?
Yes, thank you. And thanks for having me. First of all, I think it's important to see that somewhere in the 1950s, we began this gradual shift, and it's too much of a process to go into here, where we started to shift away from an appreciation that parents in general, right, were designed, and children were designed as well, to be the parent, teacher, coach of children, right? That children were genetically programmed to learn from our parents what we do and what we don't do. And we shifted to a framework of experts, and in that shift, and there's lots of reasons for that, we shifted away from a family systems approach, right, to a more individual focus on children. And so what I saw in the last, 15, 20 years that I've been sort of coaching is that, children need to be able to learn from parents. And if they're initial parents, for any number of reasons, right, generational trauma, right, cultural challenges, coming into this country, any of the problems that beset the family, exposure and engagement in drugs and alcohol, children still need another family, right? We're wired for that. And so my focus was to appreciate and listen to the stakeholders, listen to the parents that have been doing this work for a really long time. And what I heard was a sense that they feel minimized, often devalued, and underappreciated, actually. And so, I took all of that information, and I realized that, they are the ones that we need to help children mature and heal. And in order to do that, we needed to give them more than sort of a topical understanding of the impact of trauma. We really needed to be able to help them see and shift away from, these youngsters have behavioral or emotional problems, looking at it as something that only therapy could address, and begin to help professionals as well as parents begin to see the true impact of trauma, right? That if we can see it more as an injury that can happen to a youngster, right? Even in their brains, right? We have so many children with prenatal drug exposure now, right? But if my parent doesn't know what that might translate to, they have unreasonable and unfair expectations for that. If my parent doesn't understand yet, right, what an attachment disruption does to that young brain in terms of reorganizing it to be living on a planet very fear-based, right, very hyper-focused on, when is the next bad thing going to happen, not knowing that may leave a child irritable, right, leave a child resistant to them, or in fact the opposite, following them around and being afraid that they're going to be abandoned or left, right? I mean, all of those things matter. We see, in terms of working with parents, the need to help them understand how the sensory system, right, our windows to the world, can be problematic, not integrated well. Child may have auditory and visual processing problems that make everything they do in the home problematic. So WPW takes a twofold approach. I'm working hard to deepen the assessment process out there, right, to truly educate professionals as well as parents to understand the manifestations of injuries to that little one, from in utero and then postnatally, and then how we can build a corrective attachment experience within the home, right, where the parent, because we're wired to teach children what we do and what we don't do, to normalize the child's experience, right? I think what we've inadvertently done is surround these children with so many services that it's almost impossible for them to feel like they have an opportunity to live a normal life, right? To live a life like all the other kids that they want to be like. And so, if we can support parents and partner with them, right? It's not enough. I always say this, but no one learns to dance or fish, or do anything, with a 40-minute training session, right? That 40 hours, right? We have to have someone who partners with us in those in the trenches moments. And parents are phenomenal reporters. I find that parents are so good at being able to explain what they see, and when we can help illuminate, right, what that is, I don't know if that took me off screen, but if we can help to illuminate the underlying causality, right, they're game to then engage in a reparative approach where they feel valued. So that's been the work that we're doing with Foster All in Los Angeles, and with great success. It's been going really well. And in
Amazing.
lots of other places too. But, I know right now in Fosterall, we've been doing this. We're in a pilot project for our second year.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that, Dr. Messina. And I'll just give a little bit of context. I mentioned earlier, as somebody who grew up in 6 different placements, and every new placement I had to go to, I had a new therapist. And quite frankly, it was going to therapy alone was not enough. And it was oftentimes, now that I reflect back, more traumatizing than it was helpful, because it actually deterred me from seeking therapy as an adult, because I associated all therapy to the therapy that I got while I was in foster care. And so thank you so much for the work that you're doing. And I love the way you framed it as, a partnership and a collaborative effort in that therapeutic reparative approach. So I'd love to know if you believe that providing therapy services directly to foster children and youth today is still a valuable support. I appreciate your approach, and I'm just curious what you think about that.
Let me see if I can answer that concisely. Traditional top-down therapy, I think all of our top traumatologists in the world have told us repeatedly, right, that top-down strategies don't work for children, often don't work for adults either, who are, vibrating at a high level of fear and anxiety, or, swamped with depression, because, they don't have, right now, they cannot access that relationship. They cannot use that kind of, or tolerate the experience of that trauma, discussion, right, as the narrative. So therapy can be effective. And this is what the Pritzker Foster Care Initiative is doing by bringing in advanced neuroscience techniques, right? Neurofeedback does a phenomenal job of helping a young brain to reorganize, right? To be able to downregulate high anxiety, to be able to focus and concentrate later because of the reorganization of that young brain, right? That is non-invasive, has a lot of evidence behind it to assist. So yes, that certainly can be helpful. We also have other advanced neuroscience techniques that, use the auditory portal to help young brains to downregulate, to be able to access human relationship once they can settle. So yes, I absolutely believe in the merits of psychotherapy, but I don't think it should be the knee jerk that we do now, where every child is sent to therapy. And again, as a therapist, I have to, I'm wanting to remind everybody in the field, we have a limited scope, right? We cannot assess, right, any of the neurological injury that may have occurred. We cannot assess sensory motor integration problems. We are not designed to assess visual and auditory processing problems. And every one of those things contributes to the child's later challenges to function, whether it's in school or at home, right? We've worked with youngsters, where parents thought that they were oppositional and defiant, and we find out later when we send them to the appropriate folks for an assessment that in fact they're able to process only the last part of a sentence, or their working memory is so impacted that by the time they get down the hallway, they cannot recall what was said, right? But that's not anything that I, as a therapist, could mitigate, right? So it is important to have a team, but it is important to have the right team, right?
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Messina. I think I love what you mentioned about just integrating technology and neurofeedback, all of that, because I do agree, I've been out of the foster care system for over a decade, and from then to now, so much has changed, so many advances in technology. And sometimes I feel that, in the child welfare space, we're still a little bit behind, always playing catch up. So thank you for that. And I think actually this is a great segue to Dana Fryer. Dana, I understand there are a number of pilot programs to use technology and various media to support resource parents. Dana, I know you're at Fostering Unity. Can you tell us a little bit more about the media created to support resource parents, and would love to hear more about that.
Yes, thank you, Maggie. First of all, Fostering Unity, our mission is to improve the outcomes for children and youth in out-of-home placement through child-centered family strengthening, enhanced community partnerships, and intentional caregiver support. And I lay that foundation to just let you know that Fostering Unity started where we're at, right? We are committed to person-centered planning, right? And design process. And so hearing from our caregivers and shifting our services to meet caregivers where they're at is really one of the reasons that Fostering Unity has gained the momentum that it has. One of those things is, and this really came out a lot through COVID, right? We learned to do so much more through technology. And we found that that was more supportive of our foster parents. Their time is limited. Jen talked about the demands on our foster parents, the therapy, the work, the finances. And so just being available in real-time support, which then led us to a lot of technology support, has been really important. I wanted to just highlight two things that we're doing that really we started where we're at. We didn't wait for an advanced application or app and things like that. And one is purposeful placements. Maggie talked about the many homes that she moved to. And we know that placements are a really big issue, placement changes. And so we have a private Facebook page that has over 2,000 LA-based, mostly LA-based caregivers and some community members. And so we place purposeful placements. We simply, it isn't rocket science. We just meet people where they're at. We get calls from social workers, TAs, anybody who needs a placement. And we're not a placing agency. We're a conduit between the children who need homes and the homes that are available. And so what we do is we simply place a purposeful placement post, and we give enough information to kind of rule in and out those families who can support that child or youth. And so you can see here this slide that's up, it's not, it's just giving enough information. So if somebody is, hey, I don't have the capacity due to scheduling or whatever to support a female who's a C-section victim, that family doesn't reach out and respond. So this is one very simple way. And again, I'm not presenting anything abstract or complicated, right? And we aren't a placing agency, and yet we've had, through purposeful placements, we've had an impact on placement stability in LA County. The other thing that we have done is we shift our peer-to-peer support to meet caregivers where they're at. So it could be, you talked about the new recruit process, and it could be just helping people walk through that. What's next? What about the court process? We rely heavily on our community partners, right? We link them with warm handoffs to places like Advocates, California Alliance of Caregivers, Raise a Child. We don't do it all, but we don't say, oh, you should just call them. We do the warm handoff that helps support caregivers getting what they need. We also do virtual support groups for our caregivers. Also, our youth is called Tomorrow's About You, is our youth virtual support. And then we have teamed up with the placement stability team in Los Angeles County. We know that those youth need a lot more support, and those caregivers need a lot more support. So we have just shifted what we do constantly, not out of our lane, but to meet people where they're at. One of the most exciting projects that we have had the opportunity to be a part of with National Center for Youth Law has been the Reproductive Health Equity Project. You can see up on the screen that we have a podcast called Fostering Parenthood, Reimagining the Talk with Caregivers and Foster Youth. This has been unbelievably successful. We're so excited about it. And it is a podcast that includes our youth, our caregivers, our community members, and it is to help facilitate the talks around reproductive health equity, around LGBTQ plus communities, what resources are out there. So hopefully you can see this. We put a couple of QR codes up. You can also go to our website, it's just fosteringunity.org, to get additional information. But these podcasts really have helped open communication. You know, times have changed, things have changed, language has changed, and sometimes caregivers just need to know how to say it, right? It's not intentionally being uninformed, but we've got to constantly be informed, right? We can't stay where we're at. We have to move in order to support our youth. So I think, you know, around technology, caregiver support, that peer-to-peer piece, our virtual support groups, our Tomorrow's About You, and our Fostering Parenthood podcast have really, really helped support the caregiver community. And we're always listening and shifting within our lane. So if caregivers like, I don't want a peer-to-peer person all the time, I want to call you when I need you, that is an acceptable service, right? And that warm handoff is really big. These systems are complicated. I know I've got to wrap up, but these systems are complicated, right? And to just say, oh, call so-and-so is not helpful to our caregivers. And so it's very important through peer-to-peer support that we do warm handoffs for our caregivers.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that, Dana. I also love just the phrase purposeful placement. That's something that I'm going to be using a lot now. So thank you for sharing that. I'd like to now move to Elena. In addition to the cutting edge technology to support today's resource parents, some of which Dana just shared, there are other considerations that have been around for some time that may not be widely known. And quite frankly, I was shocked when I, just in preparing for this, just learning about all the things. And I was like, wait, why don't we do a better job of marketing these things? But, in California, such is the case with the State Employment Development Department.
Mm-hmm.
So Elena, can you briefly tell us a little bit more about the benefits that every resource parent in California should be aware of?
Absolutely. And I'm so excited to share this. I'm just so glad to have this audience. So thank you. The Employment Development Department, a lot of people, I think of the Employment Development Department as administering unemployment insurance. And of course we do. That is one of our branches. But we also administer a program called State Disability Insurance. And part of that program is California's Paid Family Leave Program. It's also often referred to as PFL. And that offers eligible California workers partial wage replacement benefits for up to 8 weeks in a calendar year if they need to take time off work to bond with a new child. And a lot of times if people know about this benefit, they're thinking it's a newborn baby, it's a birth child. No, it is. But it is also for foster and adoptive parents. They are eligible to use those benefits. And on the screen here is a flyer for our webinar. We give webinars regarding our state disability insurance program. I can talk a little bit more about that, but I want to let you ask me more questions.
Yeah. I'd love to hear more about, the paid family leave and how much of a person's regular salary can a resource parent expect through this program? And, how does one go about taking advantage of the benefit?
So a foster adoptive parent can expect to receive approximately 60 to 70% of their salary while taking paid family leave. And oftentimes employers will maybe supplement that, or they can supplement that with additional leave to come up to 100%, but approximately 60 to 70%. And if somebody wants to go about seeing how to take advantage of the program, they just go to our website, edd.ca.gov/paid family leave. And then that'll take you to the page. And if you scroll down sort of in the middle, there'll be a subhead for foster adoptive parents, and then you get information how to apply online and by paper application.
That's incredible. I mean, I'm still just processing all of that. I feel like there's just a lot that happens, a lot of benefits that are just out there that go, underutilized. And so thank you so much for being here with us today and, sharing this information. And for everybody who's on this webinar now, we'll also send all the slides that you're seeing during this webinar after the event is over so that you can, actually reach out to somebody directly. But I wanted to ask one last question.
Sure.
In terms of, cost. I think a lot of people want to understand, what does it cost the employee and the employer? And, potentially, I think I learned a couple of years ago also that for companies that hire veterans or even hire foster youth, that there are tax benefits and things like that. So just, there's obviously a lot to navigate there, but I'd be curious, what it costs the employee and the employer for this.
For this program. State disability insurance program, that's of which paid family leave is a part, is 100% worker funded, California worker funded. It's funded through mandatory payroll deductions, so it does not cost employers anything. Now, not every single California worker pays into the program. There are a few exceptions, but most do. And the best way to know if you do is you look on your pay stub, and if you see a deduction CASDI, California State Disability Insurance, then you'll know that you pay into the program. So it seems to be something that, again, I think people know that, have an idea like, oh, I think I can take some time off when I have a birth child, but the program goes beyond that. I mean, it's disability insurance, and then we have the paid, which has been around since 1946, paid family leave, which was signed into legislation in 2002 and has been administering benefits just since 2004. And it's for bonding, it's for caregiving, and it's also to assist a military family member who is being deployed to a foreign country. Lots of benefits. And like we said with that webinar, we do webinars on this. They're 45 minutes plus Q&A. However, I always like to tell people, because not everybody has 45 minutes to an hour for a webinar, we can tailor it to what you need. If you want to just know about how to take, about the bonding benefits, how to fill out the claim form, what to expect, we can customize it to you. We are just excited to get the information out because it sounds like it could be a very, very valuable resource. So,
yeah, that's amazing. Thank you so much, Elena, for sharing all of that. And, we spoke about this earlier too. So many of the other panelists have mentioned kind of the challenges for foster parents and foster to adopt parents. And this is certainly one of those solutions. And this conversation kind of reminds me of this idea that, you don't know what you don't know, right? So, now that everyone's here, we all know. So, well, thank you again for that. Given that this is a solution series, and I want to make sure that we understand everything that we've brought to light in this session, right? We've covered therapy, we've covered challenges and recruitment, we've covered benefits and technology. I have a few questions that I'd like to just throw out to this entire panel to answer really quickly. And not everybody has the answer, but just if you'd like to, before we turn to the Q&A part of this session. So the first one is, show of real hands or virtual Zoom hands of our panelists, who here, believes we're recruiting and supporting resource parents properly for today's needs. Oh, no hands. Okay. Well, that's why we're here. Well, I'd love to hear from a few of you, obviously you've all kind of shared what you're working on, and if there's any high level improvements that just, as far as themes that we can all think of, what high level improvements or themes of improvements should be made? Because clearly we're not doing it right. So what can we do, as far as improvements?
I think Dana's hand is up.
Go ahead, Dana.
Yeah, so I think one of the things is shifting the cultural thought of how we include caregivers into planning, into therapeutic responses, everything that we do. There's a very in-out culture of with caregivers and the system. And so I think if we can shift, it's one thing to say, yeah, we listen to caregivers. It's another thing to bring them in, like we have done with foster youth, right? Just bring them into conversations about system changes, systems improvements, what they need. Again, going back to that person-centered design process with more persons included. And I think that genuine shift of everybody's in group versus here's an in group and you're out group, and we're going to tell you there are things, of course, that have to be done, right? And so there are rules that have to be followed, but there's also a culture of disrespect, I think, to our caregivers as well.
Yeah, I would add that it's important to tell them the truth from the beginning, right? That we do need to be, I don't have the data on this, but I would be curious to think, I think parents that sign up for medically fragile children probably have a longer retention rate because they actually know what they're signing up for and they know their role and they're actually quite respected for that role. We don't tell the truth about the way in which children are truly experiencing harm from the experience of trauma. So we do that phrase a lot, well, this is because of trauma, but we don't really tell them the truth of that. And then we don't equip them again with that partner. And I would so agree with Dana that there's a lack of respect. We often are the first to blame them when things are going poorly, or we want them to hold on to children with, because we think we've surrounded them with a ton of support. But the reality is the parent is the person most in place to help that youngster. And so if we could see it that way and respond to them that way, right, support them, hold them up, connect them, I think we would be doing better. Yeah.
Amazing. I love that. It sounds like transparency and just better communication is one of those things. And I completely agree. And this kind of is a good segue into the next question. And I just want to encourage everybody in the audience to also type their questions into the Q&A because shortly we'll get to all the questions there. But a big concern preventing prospective foster and foster to adopt parents from moving forward with committing to starting the approval process is the fear that they'll fall in love with a child in foster care and then the child will be reunified with birth parents. And I've heard this quite a bit too now in my work. I would love to hear if anyone has a suggested solution to this problem, and how do you think we can change the narrative around the process so that we don't deter, parents or, prospective foster or resource parents?
This is Jen. I think that this going into foster care, that is a challenge and a loss and a heartache that parents have to be ready to face. Because resource parents foster in order to help the youth and the family reunite, and that's the number one goal. That being said, I think that at times where the resource parent can have a relationship with the biological family, and even after reunification is just amazing for both parties and obviously the child most of all, to have that committed family that loves them and is cheering for them and is available to support their biological family would be the best possible outcome, I think, for all parties. But there are a lot of challenges and barriers to making that happen. And I think the system can do more to facilitate that process and nurture that relationship. And really, it's the best thing for all parties, I think.
I agree with Jen too. And when at all possible to have that extended family is just so helpful, right? It's helpful to strengthen reunification, right? If the bio family has that support, they're less likely to get into crisis situations, right? They have extended family, which can be caregivers. I think also the message in foster care, and we deal with this a lot at Fostering Unity, is I want to adopt through foster care. We have to continue to use the message that reunification is the goal. And whenever possible and safe, that is what is best for the child, right? It's not opportunity. It's not money. It's not, can I give more than the parent, right? It's about creating the safe home for the child to go back to. I think we're asked a lot of foster parents, give 100% and be ready to let go. That is a big ask. And so for, we cover a lot in Coffee with Caregivers, the healing process when children reunify. So we can't just make that ask and then say, well, you knew what you were getting into, so, it's on you. We have to help them, right? Through the placement changes that are a little heartbreaking. It's a lot to ask of somebody to say, give 100% of what you have and be okay with letting go, right? And so just continuing to talk about how you can continue to be involved in supporting, how you can be available if reunification doesn't happen. You got to talk the whole circle of conversation and support the emotions that go with it.
I think also we have to change how our system operates, right? We need to assist the social workers who are in placement, to work through and resolve, and they're not just internally, but how the system is working, which leads them to burnout and leads them to end up vilifying the parent, the bio parent often. We don't have a system in place right now that allows the foster parent and the bio parent to meet first, right? To have that meeting. We send the child off to the visit. When the child comes back from the visit, foster parent sees the child, in distress and assumes that means they shouldn't have the visit, or, we have to have a better humanitarian system in place that truly, again, we're seeking more respect for the resource parents. We need to generate respect for the bio parents, right? That very rarely does someone lose their child because they deliberately and purposefully, right? It's out there, I understand that, but right, these are overtaxed, overwhelmed, intergenerational trauma, right, that has led this parent to end up in a situation where they've lost their child. And that message needs to be, held in truth everywhere we go. So I would love to see that opportunity to have those parents meet first and be real clear, and also to step up the visits, right? Actually, to step up the visits versus these infrequent sessions with parents as best we can.
Great. Thank you so much for that perspective, everyone. I will say, just from personal experience, I do agree with you, Dr. Messina, that, it's more often than not that parents don't do anything deliberately. It's just, and when I talk about how I ended up in foster care, it is by no means something that was intentional. It's just, I think it's a culmination of a lot of different societal challenges, things like lack of access to education, healthcare, and all of these things that then contribute to children and youth ending up in the system. So I do agree with that. And then I have one last question for our panelists, and then I'd like to continue with the Q&A session. So as I see a couple questions in there already, and as they're coming in, just, we're going to get to them. We're going to get to all of them, I promise. So the last question I have is, I've heard a lot about the promise of respite care, but that our resource families are having difficulty in accessing respite care. So what is the solution, and, how do we fix that?
I think that respite care needs to be available in several different levels, if you will. For our most complex needs, or youth with complex needs, I think there needs to be more of a trained professional type of respite care available. So that would be other resource families that have, training in trauma, and ideally have a relationship with the youth. So in an ideal world, there would be another resource parent that's partnering with the family that has a youth with a high level of need. And there are some models out there, the Mockingbird project, in that there's a respite family for a hub for a group of families that can step in and help out, and the family already has a pre-existing relationship. But aside from that, there's both the funding piece of respite to fund a respite care provider, and then also finding an appropriate family that could be either an alternative caregiver is one term, or a respite care provider. And so some counties and agencies have a list available that that caregivers can reach out to families, and even that level of help for families is something.
And we just, again, started where we're at, our private Facebook page. We have families post, and then other families step in. It's not this overall solution to the problem. I think Jen is talking about, we don't have any way to connect, a real efficient way to connect the need with the support. But until we have that, we always talk about a problem and we're waiting for a system to solve it. We got to sometimes start where we're at. And sometimes it's just a way for families to connect and say, I have a need, and another family say, I can meet that need. It'd be great to have it more organized, but we got to start somewhere because families are burning out without respite.
Great. Thank you all so much for that perspective. I think, we're kind of reaching the top of the hour, and, I just wanted to take a moment to kind of highlight a couple of things that of the notes that I took through this. I think we covered everything from transparency to leveraging technology and accessing, benefits, better trainings, taking a humanitarian and reparative approach, and then just kind of, this last point that you just mentioned, Dana, how do we bridge the gap between the need and the support and resources, and, create a village of support for our resource parents and prospective foster parents. I just wanted to, take a moment to thank every one of you for just sharing your expertise, your knowledge, and sharing your time with us. Thank you again to everybody who served on this panel this morning. And then of course to Foster Together Network, Pritzker Foster Care Initiative, Center for Strategic Partnerships, the Big Orange Spot, and especially Rich Valenza at Raise a Child, who's behind the curtains, really, but he's a big part of putting together this incredible session. With that, I'd like to continue with the Q&A session for all. So if everybody in the audience can just type their questions into that Q&A button right next to the raise hand button. I will now be handing this over to Jamal, who will help us with the Q&A. But thank you all so much for taking the time, for your attention. I know it was a lot of information, but I hope this was, a very critical and helpful information to the work that all of you do day in and day out, for which I, as a former foster child and youth, am incredibly appreciative of. Thanks, everyone.
Let me say, wow, just wow. The information, phenomenal, the knowledge, top tier. It's something about being in this field that makes you want to continue to learn, even when you're not in school. But when you jump on these webinars, you're jumping on for a reason. It's to get insight about what's happening across the field, and to also do a deeper dive to what are we doing? What am I doing as a worker to make sure that I'm connecting with my children and families a lot more and a lot more efficiently? And what I tell you, that this session for me, ladies, I don't have a lot of words, but I want to get into a lot of the questions that were coming through the Q&A. But before I get into the questions, I want to say and give a huge shout out to Maggie. Maggie has been the moderator for this morning, and she has given her all and then some. And from one former foster youth to another, Maggie, phenomenal. Simply phenomenal. Thank you for your leadership. All right. So we have the first question from an anonymous attendee that said, how can caretakers find the right assessment or place to take their kids when they have not received any concrete help from the worker or the kids or kiddos mental health team? So if any one of you—
I could probably answer that, Jamal. So if you're in Los Angeles, reach out to us in Foster All, because we are walking parents through that in a more concrete way. But otherwise, let me say quickly, and then maybe Jamal, I can send you a spreadsheet that I have put together for parents and professionals.
That would be awesome.
If you're concerned about prenatal exposure, right, then you want to be talking to a neurologist or a neurocog psychologist to assess for that. If we are concerned, and it is almost always going to be true, that your youngster has had some profound attachment disruption, you need a therapist who identifies with that skill set to be able to help the parent determine what is the attachment style of this little youngster coming in with me. Is it disorganized, insecure, dismissive? Because that impacts the parent and how we will assist that youngster in recovering and healing. Sensory integration issues, you want to reach out to an occupational therapist. auditory processing issues, reach out to an audiologist who is trauma informed and can assess for auditory processing. And visual processing, if you reach out to a developmental optometrist or ophthalmologist who does and identifies as doing vision therapy. If you have a youngster with an IEP, any of those things that I mentioned are more than likely contributing to the challenges that your youngster is having, which then manifest as behavioral and emotional problems. And if we can never address the bottom, right, what is the causal contributors, then we've abandoned the youngster to a view of that as oppositional or defiant, or any number of diagnoses that don't adequately describe what's going on. So I hope that was a quick overview, and I can send you something to hand out to everybody.
Thank you, doctor. That would be amazing. That way we're able to get that information out.
Yeah.
Next question, how many times can family take paid leave? Do the 8 weeks reset every year? And especially those families with families specifically that are fostering.
So paid family leave is based on when you have the child entering the family. So it's not something you can take every year, but if you take a child into the family, let's say November 1st, you have until you can use up until November, or I guess October 31st, the next year, to do bonding with that foster child. It is for the parent, so it's not for the family. But so let's say it's a mother and a father, or two mothers or two fathers taking in the child. Each parent is, if they're pay into the system, they're eligible. So they can both take paid family leave to bond with that child. They can take it concurrently. They can take it separately. They can break it up throughout the year. The only requirement is that it be used within the year that the child enters the family. And I should probably go without saying, but the child does need to be younger than 18. And let's see, was there another part of that question?
Yes, the other part of that question was 2 seconds. Do the 8 weeks reset every year?
Yeah, no, they don't reset every year. It is based on if you take in another foster child, then you would have another 8 weeks, as long as, but it's within a calendar year. So let's say you took in another foster child within 6 months and you've already used your 8 weeks, then you can't use it. But if you take another child in after that year, does that make sense? It's per child, and it's within a calendar year.
So it's per child within the calendar year.
Yes.
There you go.
Right.
Awesome.
Right. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Next question is, how and where can we as agencies target our recruitment to find families who are interested in parenting older youth, LGBTQ plus youth, siblings, and children with really complex needs, as opposed to families focused on growing their own family through adoption as a primary goal? That was a loaded question.
And I think it kind of goes back to grassroots connections. Again, we don't have this wonderful system, right? It's outside of like Binti, but there are only limited things go out on Binti. I would encourage you to connect with organizations like all of us on here and put us on your list for flyers, for outreach. We have a social media marketing person who posts all of our community partners stuff in our Facebook, on our website, or a listserv. And so I wish that there was a one-stop outreach opportunity, but it really doesn't exist. So I would say, all for us, and I think the rest of the people on here, get our emails and send your flyers, your outreach, your information, and we will get it out to the communities that we serve.
Thank you for that. So the next question, it's a question in the comment, says, yes, staying connected with the child once reunified would be helpful to ease the grief of caregivers. To see these caregivers as NRFREM to these kiddos, and that's an acronym. I'm not sure what that acronym is, but it says, how can we keep the village together? So in reference to the foster parents or resource parents staying connected with the young person when they reunify, how do we keep the village together?
I feel like I should let Jen and Dana answer that.
I think that there there are a number of ways that the agencies can work during the life of the case, if you will. And as Kate mentioned, in the beginning, having parents meet with each other, there are different programs and activities. Icebreakers is one that the Quality Parenting Initiative promotes or has teaching around. The child and family team meetings, I think, can be a really good place to set the tone that the team is together, meets together, works together in order to support the needs of the youth and family. And I think with the right facilitator and the right messages being communicated, that can go a long way to developing that approach, is that you're on the same team, you're working together. Also, comfort calls is an activity that some agencies support, where a youth can talk to their parents over the phone, and even young children. And we know that during the pandemic, when face-to-face visits weren't possible at times, that families learned, some caregivers learned really creative ways and how to make that virtual time a positive and a great experience for the youth and their parent, like the parent reading them a bedtime story at bedtime, things like that. But if the biological parents have that of knowing that the resource parent is supporting them, that they're not disparaging them to the child, and really are helping them in tangible ways, then I think that goes a long way to them being open to having that relationship after reunification.
All right, thank you so much. The next question is, how can we reach the audiences we need to reach in regards to both creating more systemic change within the foster care system, as Dr. Messina has mentioned, and reaching the foster parents that need services directly?
Oh, well, I'm not sure if the person asking the question is in California, but I would say that, as a stakeholder, you want to find ways to reach out directly. In California, there is a steering committee for complex care that, has folks working at the very top levels of, the CDSS and DMH to really try to be listening to what the challenges are still out there. So I would say find a way to begin to communicate what isn't working, what is working, but what isn't working. And so within your county, start there, move it up to the state level, find these organizations like, Jen and Dana, and talk to them as well, because they really do have an ear. Certainly, I know, Jen, you've worked tirelessly at the legislative level. So I think find the folks already in the community, to help, right?
Thank you for that answer. Okay, as a foster parent and a professional working with foster youth, the most challenging work is to find timely and proper mental health programs. How do you navigate the system that is already overwhelmingly with limited resources?
Well, I could take that again, but what I would say is, again, first, let's find out if mental health is what the youngster needs first and foremost. Again, in California, we are seeing that, if the system is overloaded, then there is child-specific funding that we can be sort of clamoring for. There is money out there that can be spent. If we need to move into the private sector, if we see that there's a private sector clinician doing neurofeedback, we've got private sector folks doing auditory processing. That's my mission, is to get this information out to, at the professional level and at the county and state levels, so that we are not just overwhelming the Medi-Cal systems that, have a 6-month wait list just to get a youngster assessed. So I commiserate with whoever asked that question. It is, again, a systems issue that we still need to solve. But But to wait 6 months to then find out that the challenges that the youth is experiencing cannot even be addressed by someone like me, but should be better addressed, right? We need to be, to be doing a better job at the beginning to make sure that we know exactly how to help a youngster, right? And that's a deeper assessment.
Doctor, thank you for your remarks. And the last question of the morning. Working closely with birth families has allowed us to stay connected after reunification, depending on the birth parent's choice. And actually, it's not a question, that was more of a comment. So here is another one, Doctor, for you, and this will be the final. Can you provide a link to or private providers that take Medicaid?
Yeah, I wish I could. I don't know who takes Medi-Cal, and I think that's still really frustrating piece of it, that, most, again, in California, most of us out here in the private sector, if we took insurance at all, we're required to also accept Medi-Cal, so direct funding. You kind of have to go to their sites to determine whether or not they take Medi-Cal. Don't forget that often out there, underutilized is victim witness funding. We have been able to successfully use victim witness funding to pay for neurofeedback. Haven't tried it yet with our integrative listening systems, but when you can make a case for this being an adjunctive treatment, then there's room for that, to get that kind of support. But as I said, there is other funding available. So if you find a clinician in your community that is doing the kind of work that you need done, right? So if we look at equine therapy, right, that isn't necessarily paid for by Medi-Cal, I don't think, but we find the resources, right, within the county. That's the county social worker's job often, right, to dig a little deeper to find out, right, or maybe the RAP team, to say, if this is a service that is needed, then somebody needs to come up with the funding.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Again, let me thank all of you, all 62 of you that has joined us today for this webinar. Join us again next week, next Wednesday. Don't be late. Put it in your calendars, your Google Calendar, your iCalendar, your calendar, your written calendar. Put it in your calendar that next week on Wednesday, 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern, for our third session. Say it again, our third session of Foster Together Network, the solution series that is entitled Protecting Our Commercially Sexually Exploited Children. Again, thank you to our panelists. Join us then. My name is Jamal Callahan from the North American Council of Adoptable Children. I thank you, and we will see you next week.
Thanks, Jamal.
Thanks, Jamal.
Thank you.
Thank you.